What is up everybody, Martin Gill here, back at it again with another Genshin Impact video. With Childe making a banner rerun in patch 1.4, alongside everybody's favorite edgy nun, I thought I would make an updated weapon tier list for Childe. Of course, I won't be including any of the 5 stars because if you have one, either Amos or Skyward, they are both spectacular on him. Elegy of the End, however, not so great. With that being said, let's jump right into the video. Let's start off with Stringless. It has an average base attack for a 4-star weapon being 42 at level 1 and 510 at 90. And it has Elemental Mastery as its secondary stat. To be honest, Elemental Mastery is a really wasted stat on Childe, unless you're doing one-shot videos for YouTube. But the reason why it's bad is because there isn't a Pyro unit in the game that consistently applies Pyro off-field that can keep up with Childe's Hydro application to support him to make use of the Elemental Mastery stat. The passive, however, is amazing for Childe, helping out all sources of his damage output, be it his basic attacks in melee form, his Riptide procs, which is actually a huge part of his damage output, and also his burst. A big disclaimer that I want to add is that the Stringless passive is calculated alongside any form of elemental damage, such as the Hydro damage Childe gains from Ascension. He gains around 28% Hydro damage at level 90, alongside a maxed out Hydro Goblet and 2 pieces of Heart of Depth, bringing his total Hydro damage to around 90%. This is very important because just like attack, overstacking on one stat gives diminishing returns. So this weapon overall loses a bit of value on Childe. I would say this weapon ranks around B tier. If they ever included a Pyro Xingqiu in the future, this weapon will definitely be bumped up a tier. Next, we have the Alley Hunter. Not in the game yet, but it will be by the time Childe's banner drops. Right off the bat, this weapon has a higher than average base attack value, being 565 at level 90, which is really important, especially for main DPS type units. This weapon has an attack percent as its secondary stat, not the best stat for it, but still decent for a DPS unit. Sadly, the passive really contradicts with how Childe wants to play, giving more damage the longer you stay on field, whereas Childe generally takes the stage for a couple of seconds before swapping out to the sub DPS to ensure that he doesn't cripple himself the next time he takes the stage. Overall, this weapon for me is also a B tier. It's a nice stat stick, but it's hard to fully utilize the passive for this weapon. Please note that this weapon might be tweaked when it gets officially released, so it might go up a tier or go down a tier. Moving on, we have the Blackcliff Warbow. It's a standard Blackcliff weapon, giving bonus attack when you defeat an enemy. It's not the most consistent passive, but it is still a respectable amount of attack increase. It has a higher than average attack stat as well, which is really important, and crit damage as its secondary stat, one of the better late game stats to shoot for. But sadly, the crit damage value is a bit too low in comparison to its other Blackcliff counterparts. Overall, this weapon is a solid A tier, one of the better statistics for him for sure. Next up is the Compound Bow. Not great on Childe in my opinion. It has a lower than average base attack and a secondary stat that Childe can't fully utilize, being physical damage bonus. With how fast Childe hits, he can easily gain stacks for his weapon's passive for more attack and attack speed. Overall, this weapon is gonna be in the D tier, not the worst, but definitely not good either. Up next, we have the Favonious Warbow, an amazing support weapon, but you really shouldn't be building Childe as a support anyways, so this weapon goes straight into the F tier for me, right into the trash can. Next up is the Prototype Crescent. Average base attack and attack percent secondary stat. The passive gives bonus movement speed and attack when you attack an enemy's weak spot with your charged attacks. This passive isn't completely horrible because you do use your ranged attacks from time to time, but it's hard to hit the enemy's weak spots with melee charged attacks, so this passive is kinda 50-50 for me. Overall, I would say this is a C tier weapon for sure. Next off is the Royal Bow. With the same exact stats as the Prototype Crescent, average stats for a DPS bow, however the passive is horrible. You gain crit rate every time you hit an enemy, but you lose it immediately when you crit. Okay, who on earth designed this weapon? Its passive is almost non-existent. This weapon falls into the D tier for me. It's not the absolute worst, but it's still pretty bad. Up next is a juicy one. We have the Rust, which also has the same stats as the Royal Bow and Prototype Crescent, being an average stat stick. However, the passive is insane, giving 40% normal attack bonus, which works in its melee form, and goes all the way up to 80% at R5. It's just such a ridiculously high number for a passive to be honest, but just like the Stringless, this passive is calculated the same way as Hydro damage, so right away diminishing returns already, and this passive only works for normal attacks. So charged attacks, Riptide damage, and burst damage is completely unaffected by this passive, which are all integral parts of Childe's kit to do more damage. Overall, this weapon is also a B tier for me because while the passive isn't the best, the numbers on it are just ridiculously high. Up next is the Sacrificial Bow. On paper, it looks really good, being able to help with Childe's really long cooldown on his elemental skill, but because of the way Childe's skill works, where the cooldown only starts counting down the moment he leaves his melee stance, be it cancelling it manually or switching out, that Childe will never be able to trigger this weapon's passive, making it the bottom of the barrel for him. This weapon is probably the worst weapon for Childe, F tier for sure, right into the trash can. Following that, we have the Viridescent Hunt. You can only obtain this weapon from the Battle Pass, so this is kind of a pay-to-win weapon, but it is definitely worth it, because although it has an average base attack, it has one of the best substats out there, being crit rate and a pretty high value at that, being only slightly lower than a maxed out 5-star crit rate circlet. The passive on this weapon helps you do way more damage as well, not because of the bonus damage instances, which aren't even that good, because it's based on physical damage and Childe is more of a hydro damage DPS, but because of the cyclone that continuously pulls enemies closer, allowing Riptide to proc on all grouped enemies. Overall, this weapon is the best choice for Childe. I'm gonna put it in the S tier. Finally, we have the Windblume Ode from the 1.4 event. Honestly, this bow is just a worse version of Stringless in every aspect. One key thing to note about this weapon's passive is that it only works on the character equipped with the bow, so it's not even that good of a support weapon, sadly. And especially in Childe's case, where elemental mastery isn't very important outside of one-shot combos. With that being said, I'll have to rank this weapon at D tier as well. Well, that's it for the video. I hope you guys enjoyed. Let me know down in the comments below about this list. Don't forget to hit that like and subscribe button if you enjoyed, cause I'll be posting more Genshin related content in the future, so stay tuned. That's all for today. Thanks for watching. I'll see you guys next time. Bye!